Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. And today I have Richard Jeffares from Two Bays Brewing, all the way on the other side of the world from Australia. Thank you so much for joining us today, Richard.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for having me. And g'day, everybody, as we like to say down under, which means
So,
hello.
I wanted to start off with just getting some of the basics about Two Bays, about your experience, and just give us a high level of like when did Two Bays open, um, where are you located, some basic things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we produced our first beer for a gluten-free expo in about October 2018. And we opened our tap room then very early December 2018. So that's our summer. So that's a really big tourist time of year for us. So we wanted to be open by Christmas. And then we released our cans on the 20th of December, just online only. And then since then, we've just continued to grow and grow and grow. So we just had our third anniversary last December. I kind of say 2 years of that have been, COVID's had a fair impact on the marketplace, if not beer consumption. So we're kind of probably knock out a year of that. So we're kind of 2 years into our journey is the way I look at it, but it's just taken us 3 years to get there. We're based in Melbourne, which is, a little place called Dramana, which is about an hour south of Melbourne. So Melbourne's the southernmost capital city on the mainland of Australia. We're a population of 5 million odd people. So, similar to some of the smaller cities, cities in the States. And where we're based, we're based between two beautiful bays, bay areas. We've got a bit of ocean beach. We've got lots of breweries, lots of distilleries, lots and lots of wineries, really active outdoor area. And we can travel to the city pretty easily and be in the big smoke in an hour, but otherwise we live a great lifestyle down here. So
Nice.
When we looked at where to put the brewery, it was kind of like, do I do it near home or do I do it near the people? And we decided to do it near home and the beer can just travel. So turned out to be a good thing.
I was going to ask you about the brewery name, but I think you just called it out in what you just said. You're located between two bays. So did that just come like as a natural choice for the brewery name? Did you have others things that you were tossing? It always fascinates me, the decision process for naming a brewery. It seems like a really big deal, right?
It is a big deal. We threw a whole lot of names around. And we actually worked with a local university that had a communication design subject, and one of them was branding. And so we worked with somebody there as an assignment. We actually were really keen on Against the Grain until I found there's a brewery somewhere down in the southern parts of the States with guys with big beards and called Against the Grain. They actually turn out they're on our shaver shop, a business in the States as well. Anyway, one of those shops where you can buy beard trimmers and things like that. And it turned out that the guys doing the ads all over our TV were actually from Against the Grain in the US. So that got shelved. We went down a pathway with a couple of other names, and then suddenly you go to the trademark office and they say you can't have it. And we settled on Two Bays, partly, we really see ourselves as a national business. So our distribution opportunities in Australia are, there's less restrictions than there are in the States. So we wanted to be national. So we wanted to have some provenance to our area, but we didn't want it to be, Dramana Brewery or anything like that. So Two Bays kind of allowed us to be pretty much anywhere in Australia, and that there's lots of places that are got two bays in their capital cities or their major areas. So it's got provenance to our location. It's got a bit of, stuff that can travel. And our branding guy, when he put it together, came up with a pretty cool brand, we thought. So then we became, got really in love with it all and went down a long way down a path of trying to get it trademarked, a few other bits and pieces, and then we sort of hit a bit of a hurdle. There was another brewery that had just released a Two Bays Pale Ale or something, and so then we had a bit of a oh shit moment when we thought maybe we were going to have to rebrand. Thankfully, did cost me a few dollars, but thankfully we managed to convince them to drop their brand, and yeah, we kept Two Bays. So you know, we think it's great, and it kind of allows us to do quite a lot of things with it. So,
and I get the feeling you definitely did not want to piss off the Against the Grain guys either, right? That sounds really
no,
dangerous. Yeah.
They smile a lot, but they got big beards, and but they might not have. And yeah, I mean, for us, you know, we thought Against the Grain worked pretty well with it, the type of malts and the grains that we're using. But we're pretty happy to, you know, Two Bays, I think is a better name for our brand and where we sit with our consumers and things. So
yeah. You mentioned distribution. So one of my questions was, and it sounds like that you have a pretty wide distribution. Are you all over all of Australia? Like, what is the breadth of your distribution now, and what are you looking towards in the future, near future?
Yeah, so we're distributed nationally. So you can go to any part of Australia, or even up into Darwin, which is a long way from anywhere, and find our beer in certain places. And that was a really key thing. So the first year of our operation, I really spent a lot of time trying to work out how to get beer from Dramana to other cities. Because I'd never been in a distribution kind of business, let alone cold chain distribution. So, you know, but once we worked out where we can get it, how we can get it stored in those places, and then find people that could sell it out of that warehouse, we then set up a sales and distribution business around that. But the first thing was to get product into those states. So now we carry what we call finished goods, so cartons of beer and kegs of beer in every capital city in cold storage. And then our local sales teams and partners will sell out of there, do that. The liquor industry in Australia too is dominated by two big supermarkets. So unlike the States, you know, it's a different distribution model. We don't need to have, there's no 3-tier structure. So we can sell direct to a consumer, and I can sell direct to a wholesaler, and I can sell direct to a bottle shop or a liquor store or a venue myself. So that's a benefit. There's also two big guys, and between them, they control 70% of the take-home beer market in the country. So we were fortunate to get our pale ale in with the biggest one that controls about 25% straight up, and have grown that into a national footprint with them. So they take our beer and distribute it around the country. And we've just doing that now with one of our other brands, the GFB brand that we launched. We'll talk about that later. Has just gone national with one of the other liquor stores. And so between those guys, you know, that gives you really big distribution and big volume. So.
And just an add on to that, from a gluten-free beer market, I know that that you're probably pretty familiar with like the Pacific Northwest, where I'm from, in the States, where there's you know, Portland, which has a number of different gluten-free breweries. There's Seattle, which has Ghostfish. How does the Australian gluten-free beer market compare? And what have you seen even in the last 3 years since you've been open with the growth of that market?
So we're very different to the States. So, you know, I was lucky enough when I came over in February 2017, and, you know, I at the time, I think Groundbreaker was the only one in Portland. So Evasion and Brearley's weren't open, and Mutantis wasn't open. But I basically went from Portland, caught the train up to Ghostfish, went over to Denver. Then I went into the middle area and went to Burning Brothers in Minneapolis, and then to Alt Brew. I forget where they are, Virginia, I think it is it?
Madison, Wisconsin, I think.
Madison, Wisconsin, that's it. So I went to Alt Brew, then I went over to Departed Souls, and then I went up to Canada to Glutenberg. So, you know, and they were pretty much all the gluten-free breweries that were available in 2017. And obviously now I saw something from the GFBA, the Brewers Association, Gluten-Free Brewers Association, you know, there's or Linda, I think, or with 19 dedicated, you know, breweries across the place. So I have been lucky enough on a more recent trip to drop into Oryx as well, and have met the guys down at I forget the name of it now, actually, off the top of my head. Whereas in Australia, we're the only ones with a tap room. We're the only gluten-free brewery where people can come and actually trial product, sit in a dedicated brew house, see how the beer's made, eat gluten-free pizzas, and drink. We now have 11 beers on tap. So we're the only one. There's one other dedicated gluten-free brewery called O'Brien's. They've been around for about 14 years. So I think they're almost the oldest in the world. And they do all grain brewing, but we're the only two that are 100% dedicated breweries. And we're both based in Victoria. We're probably 2 hours apart. They're more of a production setup, and don't have any hospitality component to their business. There's another brand. There's a couple of other brands. One of the big brewers. So is Redbridge owned by?
It's InBev. It's InBev,
yeah.
Anheuser-Busch. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of our big guys, the equivalent of maybe InBev, created a brand which is called Hard Ups or Crisps. So it's just a cheap and cheerful volume selling beer. And they came in and really showed how big the market could be, because with their distribution that they could get, they, I reckon, 8 times the gluten-free beer market overnight in Australia.
Wow.
And then there's another fairly large independent craft brewery, bit of a contract brewer, and they own a brand as well that they sort of play. But there's really only 2 of us that actually are dedicated, talking to the consumer every day, understanding. Both of us are owned by gluten-free people with celiac disease, so we understand the discipline that's needed in the production side. The others just, I think, see an opportunity in the market and just trying to put a product out there. But the Hahn product, as I said, it 8 times increased the market eightfold, based on the data we have, and but that's brilliant because it's bringing people back to beer, and those people that drank cider or wine or spirits, whatever, we're able to get back into beer at a cheap price point. And, we just see it as our mission to convert them to better quality beer, just like every other craft brewery is doing, and show them that, beer can be pretty interesting and exciting.
Yeah. And tell me about, so what was the impetus? You said you have celiac, right? So was that diagnosis and like missing beer? What was the reason why you decided to create Two Bays? What was the reason why this came to an existence?
Yes. So my brother he basically spent some time in around LA many years ago, and kind of got to see the early stages of the craft beer industry growing in the States. And he thought that it was a nice industry. And so he came back and actually set up probably one of Australia's first craft beer bars. So, multi-taps, lots of variety, dedicated to independent craft beers. And sort of through him, I got a love for craft beer. He then set up Australia's biggest craft beer festival, which was where a brewery will actually brew just a beer for that event only. And that's grown to be one of the best beer festivals in the world, according to the people that rate beer festivals globally. So through that, I just got a love, and so the whole thing for me was, if I went to sorry, I should say I didn't get diagnosed till I was late in my, mid to late 40s. So we would go with the kids, and the first thing we do is see which craft brewery was in town and go and try the beers. And that was just a really big part of what I like doing. Not particularly interested in the brewing side of it so much as the consumption and the tasting and the flavors and all those interesting things. And so I kind of say, when I got diagnosed, that was cruelly taken away from me. And I tried the Australian alternatives, which weren't, I didn't think they were that exciting. And certainly, I literally finished drinking a barley IPA one day, and the next day I'm drinking a gluten-free IPA, and I'm kind of going, oh, it's not the same. And so I got into the craft cider thing because that was, there's some interesting stuff happening in the cider, but I was never a cider drinker beforehand, and just wasn't really rocking my boat. So just decided to see what was going on in the gluten-free beer world, sort of broadly. And that's kind of what started it. So I think I was saying to you a little earlier, it's all about self-interest. And I always say to people, I'm doing this all for me, and I just like sharing it with other people. And I'm just really, really happy that there are so many other people out there that want to have this kind of option and this creativity. And I don't know what celiac diagnosis is doing in the US. I know overall the gluten-free market in the US is growing for people that either have to or choose to. And we're the same in Australia. But, we're getting a lot of people that, like me, got diagnosed later in life and had really tried the craft beer side of things and thought that they were going to have to miss out. And we're able to show them that you don't have to miss out at all. And you can make a really good quality beer out of alternative grains that happen to be gluten-free, and celebrate the difference in flavor profile, mouthfeel. So we don't try and pretend we're a barley beer. We just try and pretend that we're a really good beer. And that seems to be working really well. And, we sell a lot of beer to non-gluten-free people that just like our beer, which is also good.
I think you and I are kindred spirits. I was diagnosed in my early 40s, and same with you, had that experience of, oh no, I'm going to have to drink cider.
Yep. Yep.
And it just doesn't do it for me. So I feel the same way. I went a different direction where I started home brewing, and it sounds like you've created a pretty impressive operation down in Australia. One of the things I wanted to talk about was that you had mentioned earlier that you have two different brands that you now have. The Two Bays brand sounds like it's more of a craft brewing, kind of craft beer type of brand, and then a new brand I saw on your website called GFB. So tell us about the difference between those, and are those for different markets, or where are you going to take those two different brands?
Yeah, so my love was craft beer, and kind of we set ourselves up as a craft brewery that happened to be gluten-free, and that was the Two Bays side of things. For the Australians here, when I traveled around the States, I thought the more interesting beers were coming out of the Pacific Northwest, where they're all using grouse malts or Eckhart malts. So we managed with Twyla and Jim to get the exclusivity to those products in Australia. So it was all about all grain brewing. It was about using 15 different malts if we wanted to in a beer, making sure that we could brew any beer style that the guys can in the barley beer world. And that was sort of the Two Bays brand. We're an expensive beer relative to not only barley beers, so we're probably 30% price point above a traditional barley craft brewery. But we're also 20% above the price point of some of the other gluten-free beers in Australia. And that's, we looked at it as, we were getting the best quality malts that we could find in the world. We weren't skimping on hop profiles or hop quantities. We weren't trying to brew anything to a price point. It was just to brew the best beer possible, and the price was the price. And that's always been the Two Bays way, and that's worked really, really well for us. Since we started, and the growth and the people buying all our different beers and our limited releases and the excitement that goes with all that has been great. But we also knew that we were spending a lot of money marketing to the gluten-free community, and we didn't see gluten-free beer drinkers any differently to traditional barley beer drinkers, in which we know that certainly in Australia, 80-85% of the beer drinkers are drinking the Millers and the Coors equivalents in Australia. So they're just drinking the lagers, easy price point, higher volume drinking, all that sort of stuff, and they weren't moving. And so over here, craft beer is probably 15% of the beer market, and 85% of it is the sort of international or local lagers. So we didn't see the gluten-free community being any different, and we just felt that if we were going to be marketing to that community, we wanted to make sure we tried to get a product that would appeal to each person in that community, and not go, what, it's too florally, or it's too sweet, or it's kind of not what I like drinking, it's too bitter. And so we created GFB as a brand that is what we call it. It's a kind of, over here they call them draft, classic. That basically it's a lager, which we brand as a draft, classic Aussie draft ale, for those people that used to love drinking, the volume beers prior. And it's worked. It's an absolute treat. And the thing for us really is to make the best beer we could. So again, we felt that some of the other players, particularly the large, internationally owned large breweries, were putting a product out there that, was a product and ticked a box from a price point, but we felt we could make a much better product, maybe a little bit more expensive than theirs, but not at the same price point as the Two Bays branded products. So GFB was created. Our first beer, and that is the draft beer. We see it as a brand that we will, grow over time with other products in the range, and will appeal to that sort of that buyer and the price points resonating in the market, and then they become part of the Two Bays family, and then our job is over time for those that want to do whatever else to do in the craft beer world, and just trying to move them up and get them to try a craft lager over a more mainstream type lager, and then try a pale ale, and then go, you know what, that's pretty good. Let's move on to an XBA, and then into an IPA, and what's that fancy dark beer type stuff you guys make? So that's kind of what we hope to do with that consumer. And, we see a lot of people that come in just buy our GFB branded beers now that are new customers to us. And then we see a lot of them that will buy a GFB as their fridge filler, we call them in Australia. So your sort of midweek beers, and then we'll buy a carton of Two Bays brands for the weekend and for when they're going out to parties and things. So, it's a commercial thing, but we also felt that we could really make a much better quality price pointed beer as well. So
nice. Excellent. One of the things I was reading about on your website and your blog, I'll call it your blog, was the expansions that you've been doing. One that was very recent, and then one I think a couple of years ago, which seems pretty impressive that you've expanded that much so quickly. So one thing that got me thinking is, what kind of struggles do you have when you all of a sudden get these huge giant fermenter tanks and bright tanks? And I mean, if anyone goes to their website, you should check out some of the pictures. They're pretty massive, right? So it's good that you even have the space to do that. But what does that look like from like a management perspective, and packaging all that up? I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. So was that a struggle to grow that fast? What does that look like?
It's an ongoing struggle. I mean, the beauty is it sort of creeps up on you in some ways. It's sort of like occasion. We've had a couple of points where we've got into one of the big guys, and the distribution just takes a leap step. And we know we're planning for that to happen, but we don't know whether we're going to get that distribution. So you sort of got to plan ahead. But yeah, so we started. We've got. I'll talk liters and hectoliters. But we've got a 20 hec brew house is what we started with. And, to start with, I'm thinking that's far too big, and, but everybody says don't go too small to start with. And then we've got a little 300 liter pilot system that allows us to do 4 or 5 kegs of beer for tap room and for trial and things like that. So we started with 2 40 hec fermenters and 2 20 hec fermenters. And they would sit empty for a long period of time, Then things started to pick up, and so in December 18, we started in 21. So in October 2019, so pretty soon we actually doubled our fermentation capacity. So we designed everything for 8,000 liter fermenters. So all our cable trays were put up at 6 meters. We've got a lot of height, which is always good in a brewery. I always know if you ever go to Groundbreaker and see the poor guys with their back area. I mean, you can almost scrape your head on the roof there, So height's good. So our height's 6 or 7 meters, 7 or 8 meters to the roof, and cable trays 6 meters. So, we planned for 80 hec fermenters. So we brought in 2 of those and 1 80 hec bright. And that was October 19. And that doubled our fermentation and our cellaring capacity. And that allowed us then to do quad brews over 2 days and we started to move into double brewing in a day for our core range beers. We still went brewing every day, but it just, allowed us to have that ability to do a bigger run rather than continually holding up tanks. And then in February this year, we actually brought in another 2 80-hect tanks and another 80-hect fermenter. So that added a further 60% capacity to our cellaring side of the business. And again, that's too big for what we need now, but with what we think we can see coming, we're not sure it's big enough. So we're now investigating whether we move to a 40-hect brew house, which will change the game, again, and that's partly driven by labor side of things. So over in Australia, A, labor is expensive, but B, it's hard to find, so the challenge is to find people to brew. So if we can get the same labor producing 80 hec in a day instead of 40 hec in a day, then that works well from a resourcing and a cost efficiency perspective. And then we just added around it. We had our first all team meeting in March. So it's the first time since, because of COVID, we've been able to get everybody together in one room. It was 13 people. So in 3 years, we've grown to 13 full-time people. Plus we've got a range of casuals in our hospitality part of our business. So we've got, 5 or 6 that work in that part of the business. And so different parts, the sales side has been reasonably easy to hire for over time. But we've had some people that haven't worked out, and we've changed through. It's a different world now. As I was talking to you earlier, we're almost at full employment in Australia. So finding people to do any work is a real challenge for any industry, let alone brewing. So the production side is probably our biggest challenge at the moment. We need to get more brewers into our team, which is we put out a post on the zero tolerance thing a little while ago, just to start to see, and we started to explore, international brewers to come in, because there's just, not enough in Australia. Brewers either left the industry through COVID, decided, it's hard work, as you all know, as a home brewers, but as a production brewer, it's really hard physical work, and stressful work, because you've got to, when you've got 8,000 liters sitting in a tank, you can't afford to make it a bad batch. So you've got that side. So a lot left the industry, and then a lot of the craft breweries that people thought might fall over through COVID haven't, and many others have opened up again as people have decided to leave their previous jobs and gone, I think this craft beer industry is pretty cool. I'm going to go and set up a brewery somewhere else, and they all need brewers. And so that's probably been our biggest challenge. But we have a dedicated sales team now that we employ, and we have a number of distribution partners in some of the states that are either a bit smaller or a bit further away. We deal with all the major wholesale customers in Australia. We have a 2 and a bit person marketing team to tell the story about Two Bays, but also just to let people know that you can drink beer and be gluten-free and drink beer, because I think, I don't know, certainly I never considered whether the beer had gluten in it when I was first diagnosed. And suddenly I think a lot of people get told, well, you can't have beer, bread and pasta. And
right.
Of course you can, but they're the 3 things you sort of immediately think you can't have. And so I think a lot of consumers will just go off beer and go on to other alcohol sources. And so we do a lot of marketing to let them know that there's, great beer available. Then we have a bit of a fulfillment side and hospitality side to the business. So, it's a fairly big operation now, but it just seems to grow one person at a time. And all of a sudden it's 13 full-timers. We're looking to add to that, particularly in the production side at the moment. So
yeah, it sounds like I was going to ask about like mash. It seems like a place like Ghostfish that I've been to before and watched them brew, their main pain point is their mash tun is only a certain size, so they have to turn that around a couple times a day to fill up a fermenter, right? Is that a similar thing with Two Bays, where your mash tun is a limiting factor in how often you can fill up a tank?
I think that's the same for any brewery, though, right? So the process, our process, as is no different to a barley brewery. Really, we might be in mash a little bit longer, and our lautering might be a challenge because of the size of the grain at times. I don't know. I can't remember the tank. We've got a 3-vessel brew house though, so we have a a mash, a lauter, and then a kettle whirlpool setup, so we can move product. I can't remember whether Ghostfish is just a 2-vessel, and they mash and lauter in the same tank. I don't remember now. But certainly, you want to do double brews in a day so that your fermenter can. It allows us to fill up one of our quad fermenters over 2 days. So you do 2 on one day, 2 the next day, and you've got 8,000 liters of beer. So double brews are pretty normal, and then you start to move into triples and all sorts of other things as your shifts get longer. But ultimately, we're a food manufacturing business. It just happens to be a really interesting food product, I reckon. And so you've got stainless steel, and you want that stainless steel to work, as hard as possible. And if you can turn it over 4 or 5 times in a day, because you got the demand for the product at the end of the day, that's not a bad thing. And brewers work shifts in every brew house around the country. But yeah, it's not so much a limiting factor. We probably, if we start at 7 a.m. So if we're doing a double brew, we start at 7 a.m. It's about a 12-hour day, give or take. So the first brewer will come in at 7 and mash in straight away. And then the second brew will go in usually around about 11 or 12 into the probably about 11ish into the mash for the second brew, while the other one's lautering. So it allows us to keep moving through. But it's it's a long day, but over 2 people, they just do 8-hour shifts, and it gets done. But yeah.
Do you ever have to grab? You said you weren't brewing the beer offline, but do you ever have to just in an emergency grab the mash paddle and get in there and do any of that work? Or
it was, so at the start when we just had the 300-liter system, that was all mash paddle and rubber gloves and breaking up the clumps of grain. That was really exciting because I'd never brewed. As I was saying to you before, I'm not a brewer. My interest is consumption and flavors, not so much the actual making of it. And I leave that to the very talented, creative people that, and science-based and creative-based people that come up with all that wonderful stuff. But yeah, to start with, it was fantastic, breaking out the clumps and stirring the mash and everything. But now, we have big motors that do all that. And so when you get to the big side of things, it's nowhere near as exciting because you sort of pull a lever and all the grease just falls into the mash through the hydrator, and then big motors with big paddles turn it around, and then pumps move it from one to the other. So it's still very skillful and very technical and side of things, but it's not so much of a spectator sport when you get to the big system.
So one thing I know you touched on, I wanted to get back to this subject, is the grains that you are using, which I find fascinating that you're importing grains all the way from the US, from Colorado and California. I imagine that procuring of those grains, two questions kind of embedded in that is, procuring those grains, that's got to cost a lot to ship. And what does that look like? How long does it take to get the grains there to Australia, and how far in advance do you have to look at that? And then secondary to that is, have you investigated local malts where you don't have to? I know, for instance, Ghostfish, they took on Skagit Valley malting, which is just up here in Washington State, because the shipping was just so much and they needed another source, and so on and so forth. So talk to me about the grains that you get, the sourcing of those, and the difficulties and all that around the grains.
Yeah, sure. So our grains are 6 to 7 times. By the time they land here, they're about 7 times the price of barley malt. And I don't know but they're probably 5 times the price before the shipping, or maybe even 6 times the price. And the shipping, we actually are now bringing out 40-foot containers from Twyla in particular. So, we'll fill up 20 pallets of, or she will fill up 20 odd pallets of malt. So that's 20,000 pounds, I think it is kind of the order at a time. So it's a big cash hit and big cash investment when you're buying that much malt. but that allows then our shipping costs to be a relatively small proportion of the actual grain cost. So that side's okay, and and our view is we'd rather deal with the best malt people we can find in the world, and Jim and Twyla, absolutely tick that box from what I was tasting at Ghostfish and Holiday in particular. So, but procuring it, we just got a 40-foot arrived yesterday in Australia, and it didn't get hauled up through customs or quarantine for the first time in ages. I think we ordered that 5 months ago.
Oh my, wow.
So we're planning, so we have to plan ahead a long way. And we're trying to build a stock holding in Australia that keeps us out of trouble for a while, but every time we build up a stock holding, our sales go up and we brew more, and we're chasing our tail a bit to sort of have enough malt in our warehouse. We ran out a couple of years ago, around Christmas time. That was a little bit exciting, but we haven't run out this year, but we still get pretty low at times. We've got another 40-footer that we're just trying to get on a boat that Twyla's filling now for us, and I think we placed that order a couple of months ago. So it's not a hold up at Grouse. It's just a hold up with the whole shipping at the moment, which globally has gone to the toilet, and particularly out of the States to Australia, it's gone really to the toilet. So getting on a boat is challenging. We used to get it here in about 3 months, and now it's gone out to 5. So hopefully in the next 12 months that starts to improve. But so that means we got to think about what beer we're brewing in September, and make sure we're ordering malt for it now, and then hope to God we got enough malt. So last year we did a stout that went completely nuts and won us a gold medal at our local beer awards, and we didn't have enough pitch rice from Jim and chocolate millet from Twyla to do any more. So it's kind of like, well, that's it, and we can't do it. So this year we've got a whole lot more of those malts coming along, and hopefully the sales are bigger and better. But so that is definitely one of the challenges. And we definitely spent a lot of time with our office manager and operations and production team just planning out what a brew is, and that's kind of why we don't, we only do 4 limited package release in cans a year, because we want to we just don't know what the hell it is we're going to brew next. So you got that challenge with it all. From your second side of things, we have looked at local malting and have talked to some people about it. We certainly grow the grains in Australia. We have the rice harvest side of things is a fairly large part of Australian agriculture, and is pretty gluten-free from a growing and a harvesting perspective. We have a dedicated gluten-free certified buckwheat ag business that we could buy buckwheat 100% gluten-free from. They generally sell it into Japan for soba noodles, but we could work with them and their farmers to grow that side of it all. The millet's a bit more of a challenge because it's sort of grown everywhere, and the one thing we appreciate, particularly with Twyla, is the investment that she makes with her growers on the gluten-free growing path as well, and so getting the grains gluten-free in the first place is the challenge. Then you got to malt it, and our consumption, whilst it's growing and is I think a meaningful part of Twyla's overall business, it's not enough to justify putting $500,000 worth of malting equipment in anywhere, because the volume's just not there. And the farmers in Australia, the farm gate price is pretty high. So with some of the people we worked in, by the time you actually work it all the way through to being delivered to us locally, it's not a dramatically different price to us importing from the States. And there we know that Twyla is working with the farmers, and she manages that whole relationship from a growing perspective and a harvest perspective. We know that her malt house is 100% gluten-free, as is Jim's, whereas in Australia, there's a couple of artisan malt houses that are playing around with some sorghum malting and things. But, I've been there and there's barley shit everywhere. So, I know from speaking to the breweries that, have seen their product, and brewers that have, a home brewer that has seen the malt, and they're pulling barley out of the sorghum malt. So, we're not comfortable at all that, at this stage, we could have an ingredient that's going to be 100% gluten-free to the quality that we want. And then malting is just, it's just as difficult as brewing. So you need a dedicated malting team, and to be honest, running a brewing business is hard enough. I don't want to be running a malting business myself. So we hope we continue to grow, and we hope that we can, environmentally, we don't like putting stuff onto boats. We're happy now to do it in 40-foot containers, because that's, we're bringing less shipments over, and we're working on that side. But I think probably as an Australian industry, we're some years away before we could do local malting to the scale that makes it economical.
I was trying to think of your worst nightmare. Would your worst nightmare be your boat, just your 40-foot container just disappears into the ether, or would it be you filled up 8,000 liter fermenter, and then it turns out it's just the worst beer you ever tasted in your life? What would be the biggest disaster for Richard Jeffares?
I think about them all the time, but I try not to. I think probably our number one risk is actually our brewers. So again, we don't have any brewers that are gluten-free. They've all come from the barley beer world. And the risk is that they decide to go back to the barley beer world. And yes, we've got the recipes, but we don't have anybody to make the beer in the first place. So that's probably the number one concern. We are very concerned, from a supply chain, that if a 40-footer fell off a boat, what does that mean? We're less concerned, we've got that covered from a financial perspective, but right now I'm a bit concerned because I don't have enough stock in Australia to carry through a time frame that would get us through to another shipment, emergency shipment, or whatever coming through. Or if something happened to Twyla or Jim's businesses and they couldn't produce for us, the whole idea with us building our raw material stock over here is that we can buy ourselves some time, and we've sort of by creating GFB, which is an extract beer with sorghum and rice malts. We bought an alternative if something diabolical like that happened. Throwing 8,000 liters of beer down is not good, but it's only one tank, and I've got 4 more of them full of it. So it's a one-time hit. Everything else is a brewer is a multiple time hit, because means that you're missing out on at least one brewer every single day for every brewer that doesn't turn up. So that's probably the thing that keeps me awake the most. And then I hadn't thought about a container not arriving yet, but that'd probably be the second.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. So last thing, we have to have some fun here, and then I'll let you go. I know you have to leave in just a moment. I was reading the blog again, and it piqued my interest to Aussie versus American beer slang. I heard the term tinny, and coldy and frosty in terms of Aussie beer slang. So can you just hit me with some, I don't know if you can do this on just short notice, but can you hit me with some good Aussie versus American beer slang? Fill us into the differences.
So I actually don't know what you guys call your cans over there, but we'll call them tinnies, because they obviously used to be made from tin back in the older days. Or a frothy, Grant, who I know is part of the group, has his Friday frothies. It's kind of one of his little hashtags, and that's just blowing the froth off the top of a beer glass. we do tasting panels, you do tasting flights. So you go to the States and go, can I have a tasting panel? And I tell you, the guys are, I decided to point, I'll have one of those, thanks. But otherwise, what do you call your cans over there?
Oh, well, I mean, people will call them like cold ones or brewskis, or the bottles sometimes refer to them as bombers. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. And then the other thing I was thinking of is like a term like shotgunning a beer. Do people shotgun beers in Australia?
College kids may be similar to the States, but certainly people my age don't. And you don't do it with a gluten-free one. Jesus, it's far too expensive to drink them that quickly. But yeah, I mean, shotgunning, definitely was something as a younger person you would do. So all those are all similar. And we actually did a tap takeover a bar in Brisbane a couple of weekends ago called Brewski. So Brewski is definitely a
nice,
term that some people will use. Bombers probably not. We're trying to get growlers is something that you got. Growlers is definitely growlers and squealers. We share the same terminology. There aren't very many growlers over here. Like I think Ghostfish do growlers as well as
the screw top. Yes.
Yeah, so we don't do those sort of things as much over in Australia. But there are some people that will import those sort of machines. But otherwise it's kind of similar. I think the beer styles are slightly different. So in the States there's a lot more IPA, double IPA, triple IPA, even in the gluten-free world, whereas over here, even our pale ales will be a lighter color. I think, more lightly hopped and less bitter. And so you got, in the beer awards, you got Australian pale ale. I saw the New Zealand IPAs just got classified for as a new category for their hops. So you can put your beer into the American IPA. A lot of our pale ales will probably fit into golden ale categories and things like that. So I think my experience has been that the States will always have a darker, more roasted pale than we would have over here often.
Yeah.
Those sort of differences. So.
Well, I'm hoping one of these days, either you're going to just send me like a shit ton of Two Bays beer in the mail, or one of these days, I hope I can fly down there and come visit you and your brewery in person, because it sounds fantastic. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this. And I'm wishing you much success on your future endeavors. Thanks so much for joining us, Richard.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate you having me. And obviously, I think the Zero Tolerance, website, when that was set up a few years ago, it's great to see. I had a quick look. I think it was yesterday, 1,500 odd members. So it's brilliant. I'm happy to work out some deal with you that I'm happy to throw the beer in if you guys pay for the freight, because and you want to get a few of you guys together and get them to one spot and we can send a couple of cartons somewhere. Happy to try and work with you on that. We'd love to get your feedback on how you guys see our beers relative to other stuff. We were going to come over for World Beer Cup with product this year, but we just ran out of brewing time. So hopefully we'll get over for CBC in Nashville next year and go around again and do in-person drinking at Ghostfish and Groundbreaker and catch up with everybody and drink the wonderful beers you guys get to have, particularly all around the country now. I think some of the new craft breweries, it's really exciting to see the growth. And I'm just talking to a guy in Portland in Maine about one, and we sent some of our beers to a brewery in Nova Scotia, where they're not 100% gluten-free, but they're starting to brew with Twiner's malt so that they can create a gluten-free product for their local drinkers. So I think it's really exciting, and so I can't wait to get back over and try a whole lot of the new brewers, see what everyone's doing.
Excellent. Well, next time you're in Seattle, ring me up, and cheers. Thank you so much.
No worries at all. Thanks everybody.
Yep.
Cheers. Catch you. Bye.